guess everybody's here.
That's like the most important thing. I think that's the most important thing for a ski hill in Nova Scotia now. You just can't rely on natural.
For a number of years, when you stand on top in January, it's just great around, except for white strips.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call the Transportation Standing Committee meeting to order. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Good afternoon. I'll ask for the approval of minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? Could I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? Councillor Purdy, and seconded by Councillor Young. Thank you. Can I have we have to vote on this. Yes. Hand vote, please. Yeah. Thank you. The motion carries. Madam Clerk, are there any additions or deletions to the order of business?
There are no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Okay. Could I have a motion to approve the order of business? Councillor Cleary, Councillor Cuttle, motion is approved. Thank you. There's no business arriving out of the minutes. Does anyone have a conflict of interest they would like to declare? I see no conflicts of interest. There are no motions of reconsideration, no motions of rescission. There is no consideration of deferred business, and we don't have any tabled matters. Madam Clerk, is there any correspondence?
Yes, Chair. Correspondence has been circulated to all members for item 1311, and there are no petitions received by the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you. There are no presentations, so that brings us to public participation. Speakers are welcome to speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Please keep your comments respectful, on topic, and directed to the chair. Speakers can participate in person if they're present in the chamber now. And we have 2 pre-registered speakers. And just a reminder that if there are any questions after our speakers present, that they're for clarification only. Our first speaker is Sue Belford. Sue's coming forward. Welcome, you have the floor.
Okay, hi, thank you for the opportunity. Here today is probably representing Newcastle Street, and Sam, you're our counselor for that, and we've had email exchanges, which I'm sure a lot of neighborhoods have. So it was almost 3 years ago that our last exchange on that, and I obtained data that the city transport people, I guess, collected. And I have a bit of an issue. Now, I did send something in advance, so I'm not going to talk to all that. But what I did is I took the data and graphed it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Because in our exchange, we've got speeders, a lot of speeders. Newcastle Street is a thoroughfare. I've lived on the street 34 years. For 20 years, I've been raising this to various councillors, Sam, as well as your predecessors, and still nothing has been done. We were ranked in 23, we were ranked 95th. Unfortunately, we're now ranked 166 to get something done. So the only thing I'm going to talk about all that data that I sent you was, and I'm to your point that it was one-off jerks. And I said, no, it's not one-off jerks. So your data that I presented to you will show it's more than one person. We've got people clocked at 100, 81, 90, 79, lots of 70s, lots of 60 kilometers an hour. That's not good. Newcastle Street's on a hill. They do careen down that hill. Almost at night, you can clock somebody at midnight doing it. It used to be, now it's during the daytime. So based on the data, 95% of drivers, the percentile, are traveling at 57 kilometers or less. This is not about the law-abiding persons, which I think the majority of people do, but there's an error in the data collected. The meter device radar that was established at 67 Newcastle Street is 50 meters from the end of Old Ferry Road and Newcastle, which is a major on and off on that street. So people are slowing down to turn that corner or coming onto Newcastle are accelerating. So that's where the majority of the data shows that it's 40% kilometers an hour. That's false negative. So I'd requested almost 3 years ago, and you had offered to have another survey done. So it's 3 years. What I would like, or we would like, I think, is an organized meeting, Sam, with you, maybe someone upper management, the police department, maybe someone from transport, have a town hall meeting with us. So we had our own meeting in November of 2023. I think it's time, instead of you being inundated by complaints, that if you're open to this, have a meeting with the street and find out, because there's a lot, I learned things at that meeting. People still going down the one-way street. And yes, to your point, maybe Newcastle Street has had more surveys than normal streets, but the problem still persists. So it's not being addressed. So we would like to have that addressed. So if you're open, you don't have to answer now, but if you're open to that, we would like to, I'm moving this, I'm escalating because I'm here now, because we are exasperated of coming to Sam individually and then nothing's being addressed. So yes, I know the city's busy looking for almost $90 million in the couch cushions to make up your budget, and this is not for immediate address, but let's plan something for maybe the summer future to have a more appropriate location for the measuring device, and talk to us about it, because we can tell that department where to put that, because we know where they're speeding. So this is really all I'm going to bring. Like, you've got the data, it's false negatives in that data, but you get an idea of how many people are actively speeding in that 1 week of 3 years ago. And it's not getting better because we got increased density in our neighborhood surrounding us, and it continues to be used as a thoroughfare to avoid 5 corners traffic stop, basically. So I myself had to call the cops because I was run over. So, I mean, we're not getting the near misses, you're just getting data from a machine that tells you how fast people are going, and I don't believe that it's an accurate count of what's happening on that street. And the police could use that too, right? The police could actually, I mean, there's suggestions. We could, I think, a town hall meeting to talk about potential solutions. There's one thing to complain, but I would like to bring solutions forward and hopefully make this a much safer neighborhood. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions? Councillor Austin.
See, it's like playing Jeopardy. How do I frame it in the form of a question? Just happy. I'm happy to come meet. The only thing I'd note is the 3 tests that were previously done on the street were all done based on resident requests, and because I initiated 2 of them where folks specifically asked for those locations, like said that's where you need to put the thing. So happy to come meet.
Thank you. We have a second speaker who's joining us by Zoom. Jonathan Hamill. Mr. Hamill, are you with us?
I am.
You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jonathan Hamel, and I serve as Uber's Public Policy Manager for Atlantic Canada. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We're respectfully requesting that this report be sent back to staff with direction to meaningfully engage industry partners and third-party stakeholders. The recommendations before you carry significant implications for residents, drivers, and HRM itself, and they require more collaboration to get right. First, there's a foundational misstep in the report. Council's June 15 direction was clear. Bring TNC driver requirements in line with those for taxi and limousine drivers. But here's the reality. They already are. Rideshare drivers and taxi drivers undergo exactly the same screening requirements: criminal record checks, vulnerable sector checks, child abuse registry checks, driver's abstracts, and annual vehicle inspections. The only substantive difference is training. If the screening requirements are already aligned, the national reading of Council direction should have been to ease red tape for taxis and not add new red tape for rideshare. Today, For rideshare drivers, background checks are collected and adjudicated through the Uber platform. Taxi drivers, by contrast, must complete in-person licensing with municipal staff. The proposal would eliminate these inefficiencies, forcing thousands of rideshare drivers to undergo an inexpensive municipal licensing system with no demonstrated public safety benefit. The jurisdictional scan in attachment 6 is incomplete and inaccurate. The report suggests that many jurisdictions are shifting to individual TNC driver licensing. The national reality tells a very different story. BC, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and Newfoundland each have a provincial regulator, and none of them directly licenses drivers. Driver licensing is done through the TNC app. The TNC is accountable to the regulator for information reporting and audits. Across Canada, only 5 cities directly license drivers as proposed here. One of the 5 cities, Niagara Region, has drafted plans to move away from directly licensing drivers. In reality, well over 90% of rideshare drivers in Canada have their screening documents collected through the TNC app. On training, only a small fraction of municipalities mandate their own training programs. The province already sets a provincial standard through the Class 4 license. Mandating additional municipal training duplicates existing requirements without evidence it improves safety. Uber already provides modules on safety, preventing misconduct, supporting riders with service animals, and more. Halifax already has Canada's strongest screening system with full audit authority. Since Uber launched in 2020, HRM has never had to issue a removal request. Clear evidence the system works. So the question becomes, if a system is working safely, efficiently, and with strong oversight, why are we replacing it with a process that it is demonstrably slower, more expensive, and more bureaucratic? And the new fees proposed, $135 in the first year, plus annual renewal fees, do not offer any additional safety or service benefit. But it will discourage people from driving, reducing transportation options for residents. And staff themselves acknowledge that these amendments would create a significant administrative burden.
30 seconds.
UFCW Canada, the country's largest private sector union, has warned this committee that other cities with individualized licensing systems face backlogs and frustrated drivers. If the desire is similar systems for taxi and rideshare, then the solution is not to increase the bureaucracy for rideshare, it is to reduce unnecessary barriers for taxis. Madam Chair, member of this committee, thank you very much for your attention and time.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions? Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, Jonathan. So do you share with the municipality the data you have and the documentation for criminal records check, vulnerable sector check, child abuse registry check, driver's abstract with HRM? So do we have access directly to all of that documentation that you have for each driver?
HRM has an audit capacity. They can request any information, any document that they want, and we fully collaborate with the city at any instant. And specifically in the report, it mentioned that staff have had no issues obtaining data from any broker or TNC when requested.
So we can get it from you, but you don't provide it proactively, I guess. There's no like data dump every month or every year on here are all your drivers, here's all their documentation?
Respectfully, I would like to confirm with our colleague from legal, and I will get back to you on that question.
Okay. And how many drivers do you have in Halifax with Uber?
Yeah. Well, since this is a confidential business information, we prefer not to share the exact number publicly. But then again, HRM staff can obtain this information from Uber at any time.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Jonathan. I have two questions. Is there a percentage of English proficiency in writing or speaking qualifying level of approval for TNC drivers? Number one. Number two, are there vehicle inspection mandates for things like treads of tires and other vehicle requirements for TNC drivers similar to the standards of taxis, accessible taxis, limousines in bylaw T 1008? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Again, as I've mentioned before, I want to make sure that I provide the right answer. So I'll turn to my colleagues from our legal team to get back to you on those two questions. There's a training part that comes with class 4 classification. And as for the details of the annual inspection, again, I want to make sure to provide the right information. So I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamill. Any further questions from the committee? No, thank you. That brings our two registered speakers are completed. Now call if there are any speakers present in the gallery who would wish to speak. Anyone in the gallery who wishes to speak? Anyone in the gallery who wishes to speak? Okay, we'll close public participation then and move on to information items. We have none. We're on to number 13.1, reports, vehicle for hire fare modernization and TNC licensing. And we have a presentation.
There we go. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of Transportation Standing Committee. Just give us a moment here to get the presentation going. Excellent. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Peter Nightingale, here on behalf of Community Standards and Compliance to present on the Vehicle for Hire Fare Modernization and TNC Licensing report. So this report really deals with two separate topics. So for ease of explanation, I've kind of broken the report into two parts. So the first part deals with the modernization of how we set taxi and limousine rates. So the current mechanism for setting taxi and limousine rates is through Administrative Order 39, where we actually set the dollar amounts. So we have a fare schedule for taxis and an hourly rate for limousines, and all taxi and limousine operators should be charging those same rates, regardless of the name on the roof light or what company drivers are driving for. There isn't a mechanism in the administrative order for updating those rates. Currently, it's tied to CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and the administrative order allows that to be reviewed annually. But it really is, it's based on that existing fare structure that we already have and those rates that we already have. So it really comes down to a percentage adjustment. There isn't really a mechanism for kind of changing the fare structure beyond that. And any adjustments to these rate schedules requires approval of Regional Council. So when we last came to TSC and then to Regional Council to update the taxi and limousine rates, there was a request from TSC and from Regional Council for us to go back and look at modernizing how we set taxi and limousine rates. So part of staff's research and coming forward with the recommendation was to do a jurisdictional scan of large cities across Canada. And we kind of were able to break down the different models of fare regulation into three broad categories. The first being a fully regulated model, where the regulator, in this case the municipality, sets the actual dollar amounts of the rates that are to be charged, and that applies to all companies. This is the current fare regulation model that HRM uses, and this is the model used by most large cities across Canada. At the other end of the spectrum would be a completely unregulated fare model where there's no regulator who sets prices at all. Companies are completely free to set their own rates. Typically, this would be in jurisdictions where there isn't even a vehicle for hire bylaw, and this is most common in rural areas of Canada. And then in the center, we have sort of a semi-regulated model, which is where there is a regulator. They don't set the dollar values of the rates, but they do kind of set out rules for how vehicles for hire can charge passengers, any prohibited fees, things they're not allowed to charge for, and they also have an oversight role to make sure that companies are charging what they're supposed to be charging, what they say they're going to be charging, and they're not charging any fees that are supposed to be prohibited. So this semi-regulated model is the structure that staff are recommending for moving forward with taxi regulation. In Canada, there's one jurisdiction which we came across, which is British Columbia. Specifically in the rural areas, they have this sort of semi-regulated model where they have the parameters for the fares, but the companies operating get to set their own rates with approval from the board. The exception in BC is, in fact, the large cities where all companies have to charge the same rates. Companies can still make an application for rate increases, but the board makes a decision and all taxi operators have to charge the same rates. So HRM is a little unique in that we are both an urban and a rural municipality. So we don't really fit nicely into what other Canadian jurisdictions do because our bylaw covers the urban areas as well as the rural areas. The other thing we did when preparing this report was to do a survey with the vehicle for hire industry. So we prepared a number of questions on taxi and limousine rate regulation and sent that out to taxi brokers, taxi driver industry, industry associations. We sent it out to any interested organizations or drivers who had reached out to us in the past to express an interest in this and had a fairly strong response on this from taxi industry. In terms of the responses that we got, we found that taxi driver and owners were pretty evenly split down the middle in terms of what they wanted to see for fare regulation. So just about half of respondents wanted us to maintain the status quo, where HRM sets the taxi rates and everybody charges those same rates. The other half of respondents wanted HRM to get out of the business of setting rates entirely and let taxi industry decide on the rates themselves. Amongst brokers, there really wasn't any consensus. We have 4 or 5 taxi brokers in HRM, and though all of the brokers who responded had sort of strong feelings on the approach they wanted to see, there really wasn't consistency amongst the brokers about the preferred approach. One piece of feedback that we did get very strongly from all respondents, whether that's drivers, brokers, or owners, is that they wanted taxi and TNC fares to be regulated in the same manner. So in other words, if we're not going to set TNC fares, then we shouldn't set taxi fares. If we are going to set taxi fares, then we should set TNC fares. And getting back to the jurisdictional scan, we're not aware of any jurisdictions in Canada that do currently set fares for TNCs. So getting into a little bit more about the approach that staff are proposing moving forward, this semi-regulated approach. This would see brokers, independent brokers, and limousine operators able to set their own rates. And the licensing authority's role would be ensuring that those proposed rates are in line with our administrative order in terms of the structure and any prohibited fees. And to get a bit more specific about what that structure looks like, our proposed taxi fare structure that operators could work within would be that their fare schedule could include one or more of the following. They wouldn't have to have charges for all of these things, but this is sort of the mechanism they could work within. So they could still have an initial charge or a drop rate, which is the number that comes up in the meter as soon as you sit down in the taxi. And that may cover the first certain distance of travel. It may not. Typically, they would also be able to have a distance charge, which would be a dollar rate per unit of distance traveled. It could be per kilometer, per 500 meters, whatever they set. And then a wait time charge is for when you're stuck in traffic and not moving or moving very slowly, or where you've asked the driver to sit and wait for you if you're running into the store or whatever you may be doing. We're also proposing to allow them to set different prices based on zones. So some of the feedback we got from industry was that, the fare structure works well if you're in downtown, but once you're asked to take a run out to Hammonds Plains or Sackville, sometimes those fare schedules don't make sense, and they want a little bit more flexibility to say, if we're going, within this zone or, whatever zones they choose to create, they could charge different rates. Also allowing additional charges for additional passengers. So this excludes children under the age of, I think it's 12, which are required to be carried free, as well as a support person for a passenger with a disability. Any other passengers that could charge an extra fee per passenger. They also have the option of creating a cleaning charge. So this is something that came up at our last report and something that was requested, the ability for drivers to actually charge a fare, a rate to someone who throws up in a taxi or otherwise soils it. Currently, the drivers have to negotiate with the passenger, and if the passenger doesn't agree, they're taken into small claims court. So actually making it part of the fare schedule, they could add that charge on, and if the passenger doesn't pay, then that's an unpaid fare. Also allowing for special contract rates. So if a taxi broker wants to enter a contract with a company or even enter into a verbal contract on a one-off basis with a passenger to charge different rates, that remains in the administrative order as it does today. Limousines are a little more straightforward, so we're still proposing that would simply be an hourly rate as it is today, but they would be able to set that rate themselves. And again, the ability to do special contract rates. The other thing in the proposed administrative order is we have a list of things that taxis and limousines are not allowed to charge for. So they cannot charge a different set of rates for taxis versus accessible taxis. So that would be for a broker that had both regular taxis and accessible taxis. They'd have to be at the same rate. Drivers are also not allowed to charge for the use of credit or debit to pay their fare, cannot charge extra for children or support persons, not allowed to charge for assisting a passenger into or out of the vehicle or in loading packages in the trunk. And they cannot charge an additional fee for mobility aids such as wheelchairs or walkers or for transporting a service animal. So the licensing authority's role would be the broker, the independent broker or limousine company would put forth a proposal for their rates that applies with those criteria I just laid out. The licensing authority confirms that it does fit within that structure, and then if it does, then the rates are approved. So the licensing authority would not be doing any kind of analysis in terms of, are the rates fair? Are they in line with what other companies are charging? The dollar value is not something that staff would look at. It would just be to make sure they're applying with the technical requirements of the administrative order. So that covers the proposal for updating how we allow taxis and limousines to charge their customers. The second part of this report dealt with TNC driver licensing. So currently, HRM, through our bylaw T1000, we do license and regulate TNCs. So a transportation network company, sometimes called a rideshare company. This is an app-based system where drivers use their own vehicles. They log into the app. We call them TNCs, but they go by many different names. To operate in HRM, the TNC, the company, must have a license with HRM. And our bylaw sets out the minimum requirements that TNC drivers have to follow. So we do not administer those requirements on individual drivers. We require that the TNC administer those requirements. So we do require background checks, vulnerable sector checks, child abuse registry checks, driver's abstracts, but HRM staff do not review those documents. It's the TNC does. So if we became aware that there was someone driving for a TNC that didn't pass one of those checks, our action would be against the TNC, not against the driver, because the TNC is who we're currently licensing. We also don't have the ability to remove a driver from a TNC platform. We can ask a TNC to investigate, but we don't have access to their background checks or their criminal record checks, any of that information, and I'm not aware that we have any ability to request it if we want to see it. We can do our own investigation, but again, if we find a violation, we could either revoke the TNC's license or issue them a summary offense ticket, but we couldn't issue a ticket to a driver for violating our bylaw. The proposed approach contained in the report would be that essentially TNCs, the companies, would now have one requirement for screening their drivers, and that would be that to drive for a TNC, you have to hold a valid license issued by HRM Licensing Authority. That would be the same driver's license that allows you to drive taxi, limousine, or a TNC vehicle. One licensing program covering all drivers. We would screen all applicants for those, so everybody would meet the same criteria and have to go through the same mandatory training and testing. So just to elaborate a little bit on what our screening requires currently for vehicle for hire drivers and what we're proposing to extend to TNC drivers. It's a criminal record check that looks for any criminal convictions, vulnerable sector check, which is specific violations against vulnerable persons, and it includes things that someone has been pardoned for. We do a child abuse registry check, which, again, that's not just convictions. There's a registry that's maintained by Department of Community Services with the province. Driver's abstract, looking for any motor vehicle violations. We do require an English language proficiency test, and we require all applicants to have a Class 4 provincial driver's license. So a Class 4 provincial driver's license, to obtain that, you do have to pass a test on rules of the road. So essentially the province does a knowledge test, but it's limited to the province's Motor Vehicle Act and rules that drivers have to follow. HRM's training course, by contrast, covers our specific vehicle for hire program. So this is a completely online training course. So we shifted to online training earlier this year, and it's been a tremendous time savings for all of our applicants compared with the old classroom training we used to do. Our online training covers our bylaw and our administrative order. So in other words, the rules that drivers have to follow if you're operating a vehicle for hire in HRM. We also have modules on customer service, ethics and privacy, cultural awareness, sexual harassment, and appropriate conduct between passengers and drivers. Once an applicant completes the online training course, there is a proctored online exam. So again, it's all online, but it is an exam that is monitored by a proctor, and drivers have to pass that exam to move on with licensing. So applicants who meet all our screening requirements and who successfully complete and pass the exam will be issued a vehicle for hire driver's license, as taxi and limousine drivers are today. And this license allows them to drive any kind of vehicle for hire in HRM. So that's sort of a summary of the TNC driver licensing program that we're proposing. And in addition to those two larger matters that were identified by council, we also, staff identified a number of modernizations and housekeeping amendments to the bylaw, which we've included in the report. So I won't go into detail on those in the interest of time unless there's a specific question, but those are included and discussed in full in the report. So thank you very much for your time, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Cleary's first up. Would you like to put the motion on the floor?
Sure, I can do that, Madam Chair. I move that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 adopt amending bylaw T1008, amending bylaw T1000, the Halifax Regional Municipality Taxi, Limousine, and Transportation Network Companies bylaw as set out attachment 2 to the staff report dated November 25th, 2025, and 2, adopt the amendments to Administrative Order 39, the Taxi and Limousine Regulation Administrative Order as set out attachment 4 to the staff report dated November 25th, 2025. Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions off the bat here. So you had looked at, or you had presented, and in the report it says that the brokers, for example, or the drivers can set their own fares as long as it fits within kind of the parameters that Halifax is setting out. One of the things that TNCs do now that I didn't see specifically or explicitly in the way that you presented how the broker, for example, could set fares, is dynamic pricing. So changing it in relation to demand at any particular point in time. So could a broker submit a schedule of fares and say, if at this demand level, or if at this time of day we want to charge this amount, could they do that, or does it have to be set and then adhered to for that period of time? That part is interesting to me.
Thank you for the question, through you, Madam Chair. So what our proposed schedule does is it does allow different pricing based on preset times of day or days of the week. So Friday nights after 2 a.m., there's an extra $1 surcharge, whatever it may be. The fare schedule doesn't allow for dynamic pricing or surge pricing directly. And we did look at that and consider it and look at other jurisdictions. And what we found is that typically across Canada, there are some cities that allow surge pricing for taxis, but typically it's only through app. In other words, if you hail a taxi on the street, you should have some predictability in terms of what you're going to be charged. Otherwise, you flag a cab and have no idea, is it going to be an extra $100 or what could it be? So what I do want to just clarify is that our administrative order does, as the current one does, allow taxi companies to enter special rates by contract. So a contract could be you open up the app and you request a ride, and it's an extra 10% or 15%. You click book ride through the app, that's a contract, right? So taxis have always been able to charge special contract pricing, and we're maintaining that. But there wouldn't be any ability for surge pricing through a street hail. It would have to be by contract, and that's the way that the passenger gets that predictability. There's not the fear that they'll get to their destination and the fee will be significantly more than they expected.
Okay, so then Casino, for example, has a great app. It looks almost like Uber. I could see where the ride is. I could see how far away. I could see the vehicle, the make, the license plate, all the same things. So in that context, that would be a contract. So if I agree to it, that price is then negotiated, if you will, on the app. They're allowed to do that dynamic pricing in that context.
That's correct. And I'm not aware that any of our taxi brokers are currently doing that, but it's our read of the legislation that they could if they wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other part is around the licensing. So I'm one of those that believe that whether you're a TNC driver or a, in quotes, taxi driver, you should be of the same quality in terms of the vetting. So I like the fact that currently we have in place, whether you're an Uber driver or a Casino or a Yellow driver, you have to follow this. However, I am a little bit concerned about what you said around you don't have access to that documentation. And so that if you have to go and audit them, that's a laborious process. Is there a way, and I'm not sure how we do it, but is there a way for the TNC to continue doing the vetting of the driver, but for all of that documentation to come to us? Or does it have to be their driver has to go through the same process? And help me understand this. For example, I believe, and I was looking through the Motor Vehicle Act, but I didn't see it. So maybe it's in regulation attached to the act. But I thought that a taxi driver, a vehicle for hire, had to have a class 4. Uber and other TNCs allow for a class 5. And so if we go to the class 4, because the way we do it, how is it that they can avoid the vehicle for hire regulations by the provincial government through that? Can you explain that to me? So there's two parts to that question.
Sure. So first of all, through you, Madam Chair, on the question of the Class 4 license, it's my understanding there should not be anybody driving for any TNC who does not have a Class 4 license. Okay. So I certainly will follow that up to make sure that's the case, but our understanding is that you do not drive a vehicle for hire without a Class 4 license.
So our understanding is every driver, Uber, Casino, Yellow, all
Correct.
have Class 4.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, the province modernized the Class 4 license program when Uber initially came to Halifax. I believe is the Class 4A is I think what they go for now, which is you're allowed to drive a vehicle, a taxi or a TNC vehicle, but you can't drive a bus. So they kind of made a bit of an allowance for that. There's no road test required anymore for a Class 4A, which there was for the full Class 4. So as to the first part of your question about access and auditing, so I think what you're suggesting is a little bit similar to what the City of Toronto does. So my understanding is City of Toronto, they do license TNC drivers, but the license application comes in through the TNC. So if you want to drive a TNC vehicle in Toronto, you will reach out to whatever rideshare company you want to drive for. They do your background checks and gather your information, and then the city actually has to approve it before you can start driving. So there is some precedent for that. I think in terms of whether that's something, I think we'd have to go back and look at that with legal and our access and privacy folks to see if that's something that could be workable. Because I'm not sure on our current system, these are sensitive personal driver's abstract background checks. They're not things that can just be shared without consent. So obviously the way we've structured this bylaw, our bylaw requires it. So we have access to all that. Whether under our existing program, we could request that private information if our bylaw doesn't explicitly require it. I'd have to talk to our access and privacy folks, but I'd be surprised if we were able to just ask for copies of those and have them given to us. So if that's something the committee's interested in finding out more about, I think we'd have to go away and come back with more information about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Deputy Mayor Cuddle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for this report. I remember how big of a discussion this was the first time around, and so it's good to see that it's back and we're making some progress. I had a couple of questions really of clarification. One was about the FH license requirement. I'm wondering how often would that license need to be renewed? And if we're looking at implementing this, what would the cost recovery on that look like in terms of if we're doing this extra work, there's a cost associated with it. Would it be a cost recovery model? Would the drivers be responsible for paying a fee? The cab companies, was there any kind of discussion about the cost?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, so a vehicle for hire driver's license is valid for a 2-year period, and the application fee is $100 for a 2-year period. So they would renew every 2 years, and it would be $100 every 2 years to get that. So in terms of the cost, so we don't, I think the honest answer to your question is we don't necessarily know how many applications we're going to get, because we don't know how many existing TNC drivers are already licensed taxi drivers. Anecdotally, we've heard that a lot of licensed taxi drivers are also driving for TNCs. So, I do expect we will get a significant influx of applications should council approve these changes, and there would be an associated, new revenue with that. So in terms of sort of the financial implications, there will be a cost to drivers, absolutely. But in terms of all the background checks and things like that we're asking for, they're already required to get those things to apply through a TNC, so there's no additional cost there. For us, it would be the cost of applying for the application, and then the exam is $35 every time you take the exam. So those would be directly our costs that we'd be putting on the drivers. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, so $35 for the test, and that test would have to be done every 2 years with the relicensing, or is it one-time test?
It's a one-time test.
A one-time test.
Yeah, so we do have the ability to require drivers to retest. So for example, if we've had a complaint come in and there's been an investigation and there's something that's not necessarily worthy of revoking a license, but we'd like them to take the training again, we have that ability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, and thanks for this, Peter, and good. And you got it back by the end of the year. So that's pretty impressive. I liked the portion of the report about the fare changes that you're proposing. Seems very reasonable. A couple of things that I noticed in the feedback in the survey that wasn't addressed in your in the new regulations were why couldn't taxi companies have a different fare for accessible taxis as long as they didn't go over what their regular fare was, if they wanted to provide like a discounted rate or something? And also charge for larger vehicles. That seems to be a discrepancy between the taxi drivers and the TNC drivers, that they're not allowed to charge a higher rate for a bigger vehicle for more people using it. So that was questions on the rate. Now, bringing the TNC licensing under HRM, I don't know. I don't know if I can support that fully right now. I'm wondering what the staff implication would be. I mean, it's kind of unknown right now because we don't know what the impact is going to be in terms of how many licensing applications will come in through this. It does seem to be redundant, and where we're trying to cut back, well, I mean, the thought is to try to cut back on some of our bureaucracy and streamline things. It seems to be a little more complicated. And I'm wondering, how often does HRM perform an audit on a TNC? Like, does this happen regularly throughout the year, just, to make sure everything is good and they're following all the regulations? Because that seems to be a pretty effective way of making sure that all the regulations are being followed. Hold on here. And the training too, it seems to be outside of the actual bylaw that TNC drivers do get the same types of training that HRM provides. And it seemed from the correspondence we received that the training seems to be offered ongoing as opposed to HRM's one time only. So that was an interesting little tidbit of information. But yeah, I kind of agree with Councillor Cleary's questions just on kind of more information. If we could somehow have access to make sure that they have the regulations ticked off like all of our taxi drivers do, or audit regularly to make sure that it's, blind. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Madam Chair. So to start with, in terms of accessible taxis versus non-accessible taxis or traditional taxis and different rates. So we did talk about this a little bit. So I think the first thing to note is that currently we don't have any brokers that have both accessible taxis and non-accessible taxis. So we have one broker that has exclusively accessible taxis, and I'm not aware that any other brokers do have any accessible taxis. So it's a bit of an academic discussion, but what we kind of got into was, we do know that accessible taxi, it does take a bit longer. There's more time with helping a passenger board a vehicle. It can be more expensive to provide that trip. But what the discussion we got into was whether there would be human rights implications and whatnot for setting different prices for people with different mobility challenges. So really, and again, just knowing that we actually don't have any brokers that have both types of vehicles, we really didn't go too far down that path. Something we could look at. The other thing I'd share is that currently the only broker that has accessible taxis, they're subsidized by HRM anyway. So there's a contract with Halifax Transit to provide accessible taxi services. So they're compensated in other ways as well for that. As far as extra fees for larger vehicles, that's another discussion that we had. So the bylaw used to allow for a surcharge for a van, for example. Last sort of major overhaul of the taxi bylaw, they moved away from that and towards just charging an extra fee for extra passengers, because what was happening was somebody was calling for a taxi and a van was showing up and they're getting charged an extra fee even though they didn't need a van.
Right.
So charging based on additional passengers was kind of seen as the compromise to make sure that, if somebody does need a van, there's still a mechanism for the driver to charge extra. Okay. But if it's just the next available vehicle, a passenger isn't going to be penalized just because a big vehicle showed up. Again, I would go back to taxi brokers do have the ability to book rides through an app, and they can have special contract pricing through the app.
Right.
So if through an app, a taxi broker wanted to set a different rate for a larger vehicle, and the passenger agreed to that and entered into that contract, that still exists.
Okay.
In terms of auditing TNCs, so TNC licenses are valid for 1 year, and they do have to renew every year, and every year they have to demonstrate that they meet the requirements of our bylaw, which is fairly minimal. They have to prove that they have the valid insurance coverage that we require for a TNC to have to make sure passengers and drivers are all going to be covered by the insurance policy. They have to confirm that they're able to do business in Nova Scotia. But really, in terms of drivers, we don't audit who's driving for them. We do get a list of who's driving for them, but we don't get the supporting documentation for that in terms of have all the background checks been done. We don't have access to that information currently. And on a sort of similar thread, you talked about the training. So I do know that you heard a presentation from one TNC and got some correspondence from one TNC that talked about their training program, but we have 3 TNCs currently in HRM. They are free to set their own training requirements. So that's great that one company is doing a lot of training, but our bylaw doesn't necessarily require them to do that level of training. So by us bringing our training program in, it makes sure that all TNCs and all taxi companies are getting the same training. And sorry, there was one other question I think I wrote down. I
Staff.
can't quite read my writing.
Staff.
Oh, sorry. In terms of municipal staff and so again, I don't know that I can necessarily say what the influx is going to be. I do expect we will have a big influx of applications, but we've been kind of working away in the background to streamline the driver application program, which will bring benefits not just to new TNC drivers coming on board, but our existing taxi drivers as well. So we're trying to move as many processes online as possible and get that going to get those time savings for everybody, not just the new drivers coming in. So unfortunately, because we don't really know the numbers that are going to be coming in, I can't necessarily say what the challenges will be, but we feel prepared to take them on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And next is Councillor Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Peter, for this report. In reference to the criminal records check, vulnerable sector check, and the child abuse registry checks for taxis, accessible taxis, limos, and TNCs, I got a two-part question. Number one, so is this for our province and nation, but not for international checks? Number two, how long do these checks last? 6 months, 12 months? And are they yearly at the same duration? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through you, Madam Chair. This would be a check of the criminal record database through Canadian, like RCMP, Halifax Police. So we don't have any ability to check international databases. So we're looking for Canadian convictions. And in terms of, they're required to do a new record check every 2 years when they renew their license. The other thing is our bylaw does require that if they, at any point during the term of their license, they're charged with something, they have to disclose that to us, and we can request any supporting information we need to investigate that and determine if they should continue to hold a license or if we should suspend it pending an outcome of pending charges. We do, when we do get complaints in from the public or from industry about a driver having been charged with something, we can follow that up as well and see, have they been charged with something they haven't told us about? And there may be circumstances where if the investigating agency is aware that this might have implications for taxi, that they could let us know. So we do sort of, although it's every 2 year check, we do have the ability to check up on things between that 2 year period if we need to.
Okay, so in the case of the TNCs, is that the same way? Because you mentioned earlier you get the information from the TNCs and they follow up on those complaints. Does the HRM follow up on those through the TNCs as well?
So would you be, so if typically complaints for TNCs go through the TNCs.
Okay.
So if a passenger reports a problem with the ride they took, the TNC does their investigation. The TNC is required to tell us if they remove someone from their platform as a result of that investigation. And under our bylaw, if you're removed from one TNC platform, you're not allowed to drive for another TNC platform. But in terms of that information being shared, since we don't maintain a central database of all TNC drivers, another TNC, this person might apply to another TNC. How are they to know that this other TNC suspended that driver? Because we're not signing off on the drivers before they start driving.
Okay.
Right. So it's difficult to.
Is that a gap?
Sorry?
Is that a gap?
I would say, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the work on this. I see some of this here as correcting some errors we made in the early going, right? I think, the TNCs and the taxis should be as much on the same level playing field as possible, and they're not right now. So generally, I'm supportive of what we're looking at here. My only questions are around the data piece. We've had our rules in place for a little while now. Are we having problems with the TNCs in terms of them holding all this data that we basically don't have? Are we having have there been issues with that? Or is it more, we don't know if there's issues because we don't know because we don't have the data? I'm just wondering what the staff perspective on that is.
Thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair. So I guess a bit of a two-part answer. So our bylaw does require a quarterly disclosure from the TNCs in terms of every ride that was taken during that period. And we've had no trouble getting that from the TNCs that we've had that are licensed with us. That data is really more from a transportation planning perspective. It's more about looking at where people are moving within the region and how it impacts transportation planning. We don't use that data in terms of confirming, compliance with the legislation. I will say any time we need to request data, if we do have a complaint, they have 24 hours to give that to us. And anything that we've requested that we are allowed to request under our bylaw, we've never had any trouble getting that, whether it's from a taxi broker, from a TNC. But if we were to request data like a background check, for example, that we are not entitled to get under our bylaw, I mean, we haven't done that because we don't typically request data that we aren't authorized to accept under legislation. But I expect that would be a problem. And in terms of whether there are issues that we don't know about, there could be. I mean, we don't know what the results of any of those background checks are that any of those TNC drivers have taken. I have no reason to believe that TNCs are not doing what they should. I have every confidence that our existing licensed TNCs, if a driver does get flagged with a criminal record, conviction or anything like that, I believe that they are doing the right thing. I have no reason to believe otherwise, but I can't say with any certainty.
So we don't have like
I don't have
there's no track record of like problematic behavior or anything that we're looking at on this point.
No.
Okay. So what's the impetus to taking it on and changing it then?
Mm-hmm. So I think essentially council directed us to make TNCs and taxis aligned in terms of the application requirements. So there's two ways we could do that. We could increase the standard that TNC drivers have to meet, or we could lower the standards that taxi drivers have to meet. Now, Halifax HRM is a little bit unique from a lot of big cities in Canada, where we have traditionally always had this owner-operator model of taxis. So a lot of other big cities, you have companies that own a fleet of taxis, and the taxi drivers are employees of that company. And in fact, the last major overhaul of the taxi bylaw, we really reinforced this owner-operator model, and we actually put a restriction that said you're only allowed to own one taxi owner's license to prevent those sort of fleets from taxis of sort of changing the industry. Different times, definitely when we did that. But so to move to a model where taxis were more in line with the existing TNC requirements, there's really no body that could take that on. So if we said, for example, brokers have to get background checks, do criminal record checks, well, a lot of our taxi drivers are not signed up with a broker. They're independents. So are you going to say that an independent taxi owner has to do their own background check and be satisfied that they meet it? With taxi, it really doesn't work to shift the onus from the municipality to some other body, because there's really no other body that exists. So when council told us to kind of align taxi and TNC, this is the option that kind of was available to us.
Okay. And did I hear correctly that this is how they're already doing things in Toronto and the TNCs are operating there?
So my understanding of Toronto is that the drivers still apply through the TNC, but the TNC essentially sends that application to the city for review, and the city gets final say, yes or no. Most other Canadian cities that do license TNC drivers, it would be similar to what we're proposing, where the driver applies to the municipality, and only when issued a license can they go sign up for a TNC.
Okay.
So that's, again, if that's a different avenue that the committee wished to explore, we'd have to go away and look at that a little more. But there's some precedence for that type of system.
Okay. I don't know where my time is, but my...
Sorry, you're out. You can come back for a second question. Okay. Councillor Purdy?
Thank you. So just on that, the regulation again. So if the presenter was correct, he said that 90, if I heard him correctly, he said 90% of rideshare drivers in Canada submit through the TNC operators, and then the municipalities regulate the TNC operators. So if we go with this new change, it's not what most of the other jurisdictions are doing in Canada, if I'm understanding that correctly. And just yeah, like what is the problem to be solved? And if there's no problem to be solved, why are we doing this? And of course, council directed staff to go and do this. So that's that question answered. Just on the survey again that was provided in the report, it seemed like most, if I am remembering correctly, most of the respondents to the survey were taxi, not a lot of TNC, and the overwhelming response was wanting to see an even playing field between the TNCs and the taxi drivers. And I'm wondering if the rate regulations now that we're going to hopefully be approving, that makes it more equitable between the two different car share, taxis versus TNCs, makes that levels the playing ground a little. And I would like to see more. You have it here in alternative number 4. I'm wondering too. Okay, and I also have a little comment from David Hensby, a question, but number 4 of your alternative is to defer the decision, request a supplementary report, but it says this level of analysis cannot be accommodated within the existing approved budget of regional licensing program S330. So I'm wondering if you could just explain that to me, what that means. And then David Hensby, he said, does the TNC rules apply to any food delivery app drivers like Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes? And I think that's a no if I remember the survey. And then can TNC drivers do food deliveries as well? Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much for the questions. Through you, Madam Chair, to go through the list here. So in terms of 90% of what TNCs do across the country, I don't know the percentages. I don't know the volume that other cities have, but I can say that HRM's current practice of just licensing the TNC and then letting the TNC manage the applications, that aligns with what a lot of the cities in Canada are doing. There's been really a shift in recent years, I think, in terms of licensing individual drivers. I think when we started licensing TNCs, I think across the board we did what most of Canada did, and there's been some evolution over the years. The survey was, yes, it was mostly taxi industry that responded. So we got responses from the TNC companies through the survey, but it does not appear that they circulated it to their drivers because we got very few responses from drivers, whereas the taxi industry did distribute to their drivers. And so that's why we saw a large response from taxi drivers. So the alternative 4, I think, in terms of what can be accommodated within the approved budget, I think that it probably depends on what exactly the committee asked us to go away and look at. The intent of that was really, if you want us to do a more in-depth sort of economic analysis of what this could mean or what the implications of this could mean, that's something that we might have to, hire a consultant for or something. It's not something we could come back with necessarily with the resources we have, or at least not in a timely manner. But certainly, if council wants us to go explore other specific things, we can certainly do that. I think with the resources that we have, that was more a comment about if you want us to do, we've done multiple sort of industry reviews in the past where we hire a consultant and do a complete analysis of the vehicle for hire industry and compare it to, the across the country and come back with sort of high level recommendations. But that's, I guess, just to clarify, that's not the level that we did here. As far as food delivery, we don't regulate food delivery at all. Our bylaw covers passengers being transported in a vehicle for hire. We don't regulate, and drivers are free to deliver any food they want, whether they're licensed through us or not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Austin for a second question.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. So just my last question. What's the staff capacity like to do this work for licensing drivers? Like, what does that currently look like in terms of a time turnaround? And how would that be impacted if we suddenly had to do like 200 applicants or something?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So we have 4 full-time licensing staff that do all municipal licenses. So that's vehicles for hire, temporary signs, dog licenses, pretty much any type of municipal license. We have 4 staff that take that work on. So, they're pretty busy, but so absolutely there would be this would be a lot of work to take on, no doubt about it. But that being said, a lot of our licensing work tends to sort of be cyclical. We get sidewalk cafes a certain time of the year, and not other times of the year, and so things like that. So I do think we probably have the capacity to take this on. It would be a lot of work, no doubt about it. But I think the flip side of that is there's new revenue associated with this as well. So there's, license application is $100 for a 2-year period. So if we get, 100 applications, we can probably accommodate that with what we have. If we get 6,000 applications, that's going to be more difficult to manage, but there's also revenue associated with those new license applications as well. So
Where we get the data on the transportation planning piece, right? Like all the rides that have happened, do we have any ballpark as to what we're thinking here? And I didn't hear an answer to if I walk in and apply tomorrow, when do I get a license?
Sure. Yeah.
What's the actual timeline?
Yeah. So I think to your first question in terms of a ballpark, so again, what we get quarterly is a list of every TNC ride that happened within the past 3 months. So we can sort that by, unique drivers. And I would say unique drivers is probably in the thousands. But I can't necessarily tell you, did that one driver log into the app once and do one ride and then they were never seen again, versus drivers who are likely to come in and apply for a license because they do it, full time or more routine. So, it's possible you could see a drop in the numbers of people driving for these apps because, if they can just log in the app and do it, it's fine. But if they have to apply for a license, they might not. That's a fair point to say. But I would expect that likely we're in the thousands. In terms of the timeline, so a lot of the required work happens before they submit an application. So it's on the driver to go do the background check, do the English language test, get their driver's abstract. So someone who's motivated can do those things fairly quickly. Currently our timeline for reviewing a driver's license, if it's complete, I would say we're probably, around a week or if there's missing information, if we have to go back and ask for more things, it can take longer from there. But I would say a good sort of average, we're probably looking about a week. Now, after we sort of do the initial review and send them off to take the training, again, that's on the applicant. With the new training program, I've seen some people complete that within a matter of days. I've seen other people 3 months later still haven't completed the test. So again, that kind of goes back to the applicants and how quickly they go through that. But that's, I guess, those are my ballpark numbers for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Councillor Cleary.
Is it Councillor Steele not on the board?
Yes, I'm going with the committee members first, if that's all right.
Oh, tough cookie.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. So following up a little bit on Councillor Austin, so do we have any sense of how many of the TNC drivers are already licensed through taxi licenses? Because I know a lot of drivers drive both.
Through you, Madam Chair. Again, anecdotally, I can say we've heard from a lot of taxi drivers that they also drive for TNC. But in terms of a definitive number, I can't say because we don't have the data to answer it right now.
Yeah. And do you think, because I think in the report it says a grace period of 60 days to let everyone get up to speed. Is that realistic given what they have to do, how long it's going to take you guys to do it? Or will you, I guess, be a little bit flexible and also proactive? So if in the first week or two you're overwhelmed, can you come back here and say, or go to the CAO and say, you know what, we need more resources to do this?
Yeah, so we've actually, in the amendments, we've actually allowed the license authority to extend that grace period without having to come back to council or to the CAO. So we hope that 60 days is sufficient for that influx, but if it's not, or if there's one particular part of the applications that, we can't get back in a timely manner, staff have the ability to say, okay, it's 120 days now. Now, I would say that would be for existing drivers already driving for a TNC, so they've already been accepted by the platform. New drivers coming off the street for the first time, they will have to get a license. They don't have a grace period.
Okay.
But for the existing, the goal really was to not take away anyone's livelihood who's already driving for one of these platforms, and now there's this extra process they have to go through.
Right. And could you, I guess, give a summary statement or something definitive, if at all possible, to say, if we do this, will passengers and the general public, the folks on the roads, be demonstrably safer for having us do the licensing directly with the TNC drivers versus the current process?
I think what I could say is that if we do this, if council approves these changes, I will be able to say that everyone who's driving a vehicle for hire has met all the requirements that they have to meet. I can't tell you.
Can't say right now.
I can't tell you today if there are drivers who don't meet the requirements because, again, we just don't have access to it.
Right.
So.
And therein lies part of the problem. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. I had a couple of questions. One was about safety in the traveling public, so I won't ask that one because I think we had the statement. The other is affordability. I'm wondering, have we done any sort of analysis on what this might mean for affordability for our residents that use these services?
Thank you for the question. Just for clarification, you're speaking specifically about TNC licensing or the fare modernization?
Overall, the fare modernization, what do we think what impact will it have with TNC licensing changing? Do we see increased costs there, and then fare modernization as well? The overall impact, but you can break it down if you can do that segmentation.
No, thank you for the clarification through you, Madam Chair. So I think start with the fare modernization. So, what we heard, I think, a lot from taxi industry is not just that rates are too low. In some cases, they're saying rates are too high. So they're having trouble, attracting passengers because the rates don't give them the flexibility to set what they think is appropriate in a given situation. So I don't know that this change is necessary. I mean, if taxi companies set rates that are unaffordable, then they're going to lose passengers. So what this really does is this gives them the flexibility to kind of decide for themselves what is economically feasible for their passengers as well as for the drivers and what they can accept. So I don't expect the taxi fare piece is going to have negative affordability implications just because the industry is motivated to have passengers. On the TNC licensing side, so this one's a little tricky because I have no idea what a TNC charges their passengers or what they pay their drivers. So we don't regulate that. We don't set the fares for TNCs and we don't set driver wages. We sort of anecdotally know that there's algorithms that play there that try to figure out, what's the most the passenger will pay and what's the least the driver will accept to do this ride. So, this, in terms of what the implication is going to be for both drivers and passengers, a little hard to say because that's not data that's publicly available. We don't require or have any ability to access sort of what average rates are for TNCs. And it's not something they typically publicize themselves. So again, I unfortunately can't really answer the question just because we don't know what TNCs charge. I guess to add in terms of whether the licensing will have a negative implication on those, again, there will be an extra cost for drivers who sign on to the platform. But, if as a result of this, you get fewer of the drivers who sign up to the app, do one ride, and they're never seen from again, if there's less of those people on the platform, that could be positive for the wages of the remaining drivers. It's really hard to say.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
So I know this is my third time. I was just wondering if we could split the motion to vote on one and two
Certainly
separately.
we can split the motion.
And I also was interested in the way Toronto does it because that seems to be the sticking point of HRM just not knowing if all the regulations are being followed by the drivers. If we can somehow legislate the TNC companies to provide that information in the dump however many times a year to HRM, that would solve the big problem without having to bring all the regulations and licensing under HRM's umbrella of just burdening more administrative burden to HRM and just more regulations. We don't want to over-regulate, I don't think, well, at least I don't think it's a good idea, as long as everything is being followed and we can make sure the safety to the passengers is there and to the drivers too. So I don't know how.
Sorry, is this a question of clarification or?
No, I just would like to, if I wanted to ask for a supplemental, or would it be a voting down of the second part of the motion and put the alternative number 4 on to ask for that information? Or yes, that's what it would be.
Yes, you could go if council, if you wish to propose that, if you're going to split the motions, then you certainly could look at that as in motion number 2 and defeat that one and propose an alternative if that was the way that council wished to go.
Okay. And then the other alternative would be just ask for a supplemental on the second part of this motion and have it come back, like defer.
Could go with that as well if council wished, yes. If the committee, if the committee wished to, yes.
Okay. Well, would that be an amendment then to ask for a
We
supplemental?
can just
right
split
now?
the vote and see how it goes and then propose. after
Okay,
that.
let's split the vote then, see how it goes. Okay, well, I already said that. Thank you.
That closes our questions then. So we'll move into debate. That was debate. Okay, so call the question then. On the first. Okay. Oh, it's just a hand vote, sorry. All those in favor? Those against? First section passes. Second part of the motion? Question? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to Halifax Transit and the Q1 KPI report. I believe Patricia Hughes is joining us for that. Before the presentation, okay. Just as Patricia's getting set up here, could I have someone put the motion on the floor, please?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to request that the Transportation Standing Committee receive the staff report dated November 28, 2025 for information and receive a presentation.
Seconded by Councillor Austin. Could I have all those in favor? Those against? Motion carries. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you. Patricia Hughes, I'm the Director of Planning and Customer Engagement with Halifax Transit. I'm here with the first quarter report for the Transportation Standing Committee. So Q1, or the first quarter, includes April, May, and June of 2025. And as you may have noticed, the quarterly reports continue to evolve. We've tried a new format this time and a bit of a new style to emphasize some of the significant trends that we're seeing and give a bit more context to the data. We do expect this to be a starting point and for more changes in the next quarter, and we have intent to add some other metrics and new data, including more workforce data for next time. A bit about the first quarter. Again, April, May, and June of 2025, we did have a relatively modest service change. On May 19th, we added 9 additional trips back in that had previously been reduced from service. So that's, I think, the milestone of going back to 100% of the service that was pre-COVID. The first slide here is about ridership. So overall boardings for all services in Q1 was 8.1 million. That was a 2% decrease from the same time the previous year. The decrease in boardings is not concerning at this time. The previous year in 24-25, we had exceptionally high boardings. They were 15% higher than they were the year before that. So we're still 13% higher than 2 years ago. And weekday boardings were still up. So a few highlights from this slide. The conventional boardings increased on weekdays, but they had decreased on weekends. Boardings on express and regional express services increased by 5%. Ferry boardings increased by 7%, and excess bus boardings decreased by 5%. A few more highlights that are in the attachment to the report, but not on this slide. Just to point out, the Route 10 actually had a significant increase, 45% increase, which was an extra 2,419 boardings a day. And so we did make changes to the Route 10 a few months prior, changing the service and adding some service there. And as well, the 90 was a highlight. The Route 90 was up 663 boardings, which is 25%. Passenger overloads. So these are the instances in which there are already a significant number of passengers on the bus, and the operator needs to pass bus stops and not allow passengers that are waiting to board. Also frequently called pass-ups or pass-bys, but we refer to them as overloads. These actually, they remained elevated and higher than we would like them to be, but they decreased compared to the prior year, in part due to some of the mitigation measures we've been taking to really target and highlight some of those areas where we had lost in late service. So looking at the data, the incidents decreased by 12%. They do occur mostly on corridor routes, which is 76% of the reported overloads. And most do occur during the weekday afternoon peak period. The next highest number is during weekday midday periods. The routes with the most significant changes from one year to the next, there was the routes 2, 3, 5, and 8 had decreases in overloads, and the routes 9, 56, and 90 had increases. So those are the ones that we pulled out with the highest change in what was happening. On-time performance remains stable, but well below the targets for conventional bus, and continues to be concerning and a priority to resolve. We are working on a service reliability analysis, which will give us more analysis and actions, but at this time, sharing the data from Q1, whoops, I went too far, but routes with significant improvements in on-time performance are the 7, 90, 64, 84, 182, 183, and 185. With significantly lower on-time performance is the 4, 6, 22, 28, 30, 55, 58, 158, and 59, 159. Some of those with significant on-time with improvements, we do think there was a change and a shift in congestion related to the Burnside Connector opening. So some of our routes that are coming in from Sackville or in Burnside, we did see less impact from congestion on those. In Q1, the total loss of service for conventional was 0.5% of the scheduled service hours. And when you're looking at this, it's a bit harder to compare to the prior year because in June 2024, there was a larger increase in loss of service. What we've gotten the report there is due to several road closures and major construction projects, but as I'm sure everyone will recall, last June was when we started detouring in a significant way for Cogswell construction. So that's why we're seeing this June looking much, much better than last June was. And for ferry service, 50 ferry trips were canceled, or 0.3% of scheduled service. That's down significantly from Q1 the year before, so definitely positive movement there. Revenue increased by 7% from Q1 last year to Q1 this year. There was a fare increase in September 2024. So when that happens, we do expect a revenue increase and also a slight boardings decrease as a result. So definitely seeing that trend. We've also added a slightly different chart that shows the breakdown of how people are paying for fares. This was just as percentages before, but we've got the hard numbers in there now to see the relative change. So fares paid through the HFX Go mobile fare payment app increased to 42%. Participation in programs has increased 13%. So that's a total 1.72 million in revenue. These include things like UPass programs, which would fluctuate with post-secondary enrollment. Also includes our partnership with Nova Scotia Department of Opportunities and Social Development, and also other programs such as ePass. So we actually did double ePass participation from one summer to the next. So we're seeing some of the positive changes there in that program's number. And fares paid through paper products, which includes tickets and passes, decreased by 16% and now makes up 36% of our fare revenue, so just over a third. Bus maintenance costs were 24% below the budgeted price, but this is largely because of some payroll adjustments and the way that vacation accruals were done. We don't expect to continue to be 25% under budget, I would say, but that is what the data shows right now. In Q1, there were also fewer failures and service calls for conventional buses than the same period last year, resulting in a higher average distance between issues. Some of this, I think, is attributable to the oldest of our diesel buses were retired to make way for the electric buses. So now that we have some new buses on the road for the first time in a few years, that would be helping. Maybe just to go with the positive story, a bit of a word of caution. The articulated vehicles are getting close to the end of their lifespan, so we would expect this to start moving down until we can get those replaced. Once we have the positive increase from the new electric buses, then the Arctics will probably hold the numbers down and make them worse. The number of service calls for Accessibus increased by 6 to a total of 19, which is a 48% decrease. The Accessibus service calls are such a smaller number compared to conventional that the percentages aren't as useful. It's a bit more random and harder to spot trends there. In terms of collisions, there were 215 collisions in Q1 involving Halifax Transit conventional buses or Accessibus vehicles. This works out to a collision every 26,700 kilometers and a preventable collision every 51,700 kilometers. A preventable collision is one in which the operator failed to do everything reasonable to prevent it. And our final category for today is operator recruitment and retention, which trended positively this quarter. And there are significantly fewer operator vacancies right now. Operator positions have increased in 5 of the past 6 months. So we now have, with this quarter alone, 10 net new operator positions were filled. So this is important as it helps improve the workload of our existing staff while also mitigating some of the risks to service reliability. Recruitment and retention will continue to be a priority, but the staffing levels have moved into a much more stable position and aren't as concerning as they were in previous years. And that is all the data I have to share for this Q1. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Cleary. Oh,
Deputy Mayor's
sorry.
on the board
I beg your pardon?
I think the deputy mayor was ahead of you.
Oh, okay. Sure. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Cuttle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize, I have to get to agenda review after this, so I'm going to ask my question and be on my way. Certainly some good news in here overall when you look at increase in operators, overall decrease in the overloads, except the 9. And I guess my issue here is that this has been an ongoing problem for many years now. And, you know, even in the report, I think you state somewhere in there that you know, the goal is to monitor passenger overloads and deploy available resources to prevent and recover from gaps in services and minimize them. The trend I'm seeing on the 9 is that it's getting worse, not better. And it's, you know, one of the most used routes in the city. It's one that people depend upon. It's an equity issue. It's an access issue. It's dealing with the incredible congestion we have on Herring Cove Road. Like, we need our buses to work. So I don't know what the solution is here. It's one thing for our buses not to be on time, and I was hoping to see the on-time performance data still in our reports, and I didn't see it in the summary there. I just saw kind of the highlights, but when it comes to the 9, I know there's still on-time performance, but then you layer on top of that the overloads, and it's not working for people who rely on that bus route. So I'm just hoping you can tell me that there'll be some solutions coming for that. My other question was specifically about the 415, which I see has gone down in terms of ridership. I would like to see specifically the data on that on-time performance, because I've been hearing from people who rely on that bus that it's a half hour late to 40 minutes late on the regular recently. And if that's the case, I know one of my neighbors uses that bus all the time, and I see her walking down Purcell's Cove Road because it's faster for her to walk the 30 minutes to get to the 25 than it is for her to wait there. In the wintertime, that's going to be more difficult for her. She's elderly and often has lots of bags with her. I pick her up most of the time, and I hate picking her up because every time I pick her up, I'm like, oh no, you're one less passenger on the bus, and it's going to make my KPIs look bad. But on the other hand, it's ridiculous that she has to wait so long. She misses her other buses. It really isn't working for people. The other thing about the 415 is that when it goes down Purcell's Cove Road, its timing is just a few minutes off from the 25. So where you might have had more people on the 415 if the 25 wasn't just ahead of it, it's also affecting that number. And we know there's an increase, there is an increase in use going down there, and it'd be better if those buses were timed differently. So, I look at this and I see a decrease, but it's one of those things, make a service work and then cut it because no one uses it. And that continues to be my issue with the 415. I'm hoping you can... sorry, I should stop there before I have to scoot out.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair. For the 415, I think we did have some email correspondence, and there was some specific challenges with on-time performance at one point during the quarter. I don't think it would have shown up in the Q1. I feel like it would have been under the radar, but maybe what I'll do is I'll send you a more detailed chart showing weekly, so we can look at the trend in the more recent for the fall for the 415. So I can definitely send that all along to you by email. For the Route 9, I think that it definitely is a challenge, and the 9 is one of the most heavily used routes and has increasing ridership. So we may be, even adding extra mitigation measures is probably not sufficient. We did just do through September and into October engagement for the core service plan, and did have a lot of feedback, about a lot of the routes, including the 9. And I think that's potentially part of the solution. Is some of the routes that are very busy probably need more service to mitigate the overloads, and that would be a longer term solution, I guess. But there still are challenges with congestion and when they get late. So it's really, pretty complex. But I think when we're seeing the overloads, but then also continuing to grow the ridership at the same time, it takes a few different approaches before we see that number move a lot.
Yeah, this has been a problem since I've been on council. It's been 5 years. So I don't know what a long-term solution is. To me, 5 years is long-term. We need to do something, and that's so. Hearing there's a long-term solution, I'd like to know what the interim solution is, what the this coming year solution is, because I just can't continue to accept a worsening trend. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Austin.
I think Councillor Cleary was...
Okay.
Oh, he's...
Thank you. The order is a little mixed up. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I like the format of the report. It's very easy to follow. And I did notice the on-time performance, although not per route, but in general, was there. and it's around 72%, which is not our goal, but it's not going down anymore. So that's positive, if you could say that. I found it interesting. So when you look at the ridership overall, slight downtick. Weekday, however, increased. One of the things I've been commenting on these last couple of years, well, last 3 probably, so as we came out of COVID and ridership started going up again, we noticed quite a difference in weekday versus weekend. And weekend was just constantly going up. So I kind of feel like for the last few years, we've seen this weekend ridership going up. So for the fact that it went down, but weekday went up, I'm thinking, okay, what's happened over the last year or so? Oh, most governments, provincial, federal, said you guys got to come back to work so many days a week. And part of me is thinking, are travel patterns changing again? And we're seeing, I mean, this is this spring, which coincides with, you know, some of these mandates to come back into the office so many days a week. So part of me is thinking maybe some of those folks who maybe had some flexibility, were doing stuff on the weekends, well, now they're working again and they've got to take a bus into work. So that could explain some of that. So I don't know if you've dug into any of the underlying factors there. Similar with Accessibus. So again, for the last number of years, we've seen tremendous increase in demand for Accessibus. So to have this, I think it was a 5-ish% decrease in Accessibus bookings, that doesn't trouble me so much because we've seen this massive increase over the last few years. So I'm just wondering if you yourself, your team has looked into any of the underlying factors playing into some of these changes, or is it still, you know, this is a 1-quarter anomaly from what we've seen for the last little bit? Could it just be that? I'm thinking over the last year, international students we've seen decrease at universities, but then you also mentioned, you know, we've seen uptick in our programs like UPass and those kind of things. So I'm trying to sort out like what are the underlying factors in some of this?
Great question. I think that the decreases, I would agree, are not concerning to me. I think that last year, and I don't know the numbers all off the top of my head, but most quarters we have had a 3-ish% increase or 4%. Last Q1 we did have a 15%, which was huge. So I don't know what was happening last Q1, but I think we expected the ridership gains to be more modest this year because of the fare increase. So I think that's really what we're seeing. So even the increase on weekdays of 1% is relatively modest. So I wouldn't see that as a huge influx of people back to offices. It is relatively minor. We are seeing a lot more. And I guess to answer the main question, we absolutely have dug into it. We're looking at these things and have been for, you know, the last 7 or 8 months, partly in preparation of the core service plan and where is more service needed. And, you know, we are definitely seeing weekdays varying more through the week, with Friday having a lot lighter ridership than other days. But Monday has had one of our greatest increases in ridership compared to the rest of the week. And we're also seeing Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, which are the highest ridership, almost reaching a capacity where the ridership results in more overloads Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and then doesn't reach beyond a certain point. So I think part of it is around, you know, what service are we providing and what's there. And the weekdays going down, I think that I think last Q1 in 2024, there was just, you know, maybe we had really amazing weekends every weekend, right? That were better weather and people were doing more things because they were just so high up. And I'd agree, you know, even with Accessibus, that's not a concerning number. We've been operating at such a high capacity for so long. It's a relatively small change.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And, you know, looking at the the delays measures. I mean, the power of having your own right of way with no traffic is very clear. The ferry, 100%, and the bus is 72. So, I mean, there's a great lesson there for all of us in terms of the importance of BRT and getting to that eventually down the line. I wanted to ask, speaking of BRT priority transit, I'd been hoping for some sort of more detailed look at what has happened in Dartmouth with the demise of the bridge bus lane, and not having that, because this is the first quarter where after the tolls were removed, we've not had that queue lane for counting on what, that was April, so April, May, like 9 months, something like that, whatever that is. I'm wondering if we've looked at this in more detail, what has been the impact, say, for the number one at that kind of 4:30 through 6 o'clock in the evening or in the morning? Do we have a sense of what the impact of losing that queue lane has been? Because certainly anecdotally, if you walk on the side of the street there during rush hour, there's a long line of buses sitting in traffic that wasn't the case before.
So we have been looking at that impact. I would say that it is challenging to measure, and I think there's a few things that are important in providing transit service, which is the actual minutes or seconds of delay and also the perception. So certainly getting a lot of concerns raised, particularly in AM peak, if there's a bus that's coming up Wise Road to make a left onto the bridge and waiting through several cycles of lights. But in terms of the actual time delay, it's hard to measure because then the bridge itself is can be a bit more free flow. And our time points, which is where we have our best data from, there's not one on the other side of the bridge, it's Scotia Square. So we've also had a lot of changes on Barrington and the roundabouts in Cogswell Street. So I think it depends on how you look at it, but certainly we are looking at what we can do to make transit more reliable through that corridor, absolutely. When we look at PM peak, to the best of our ability, we think we probably have on average a 3-minute delay compared to the year before. But a lot of what we're seeing is kind of other than that is a bit anecdotal and there's been so many network-wide changes, like the flow is quite different. So still looking at, trying to really better articulate, I guess, what some of those changes are. But I think the effort is more in, okay, what are our next steps and what can we do to mitigate any delays that we're seeing?
Yes, I would agree with that. The time point piece is unfortunate. It would be great to be able to know, well, like what the actual difference is, but I get what you're saying. If the easy time point count is over at Scotia Square, and then it becomes, how do you compare to what was to what is now? So I get what you're saying. I mean, I've just been frustrated with this. I mean, goodness knows Public Works has heard from me many times, so has the Bridge Commission. And I would just want to register it that all the rhetoric and politics around congestion, you see it for what it is. It's single vehicle traffic congestion. That's what, when people are talking about it, that's what they're talking about. Because if we cared about transit riders, we wouldn't be here 9 months later having removed the most essential piece of transit priority infrastructure, I think, that exists in the whole city, with just kind of a, no comment, no nothing, right? And I know it wasn't our call. The tolls went off on a political schedule dictated not by us. But to me, if transit was important in terms of registering it, the proper thing would have been to say, hey, we don't have a solution for this fix. We better not go ahead on April 1. We better sort that out before we proceed. But that's not what happened. So hence my questioning now, and I'm hoping that it sounds like things are close with the Bridge Commission and us, so I'm hoping that by the new year, we might have this back, and maybe next quarter it will be a non-issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. My first questions are following up on Deputy Mayor Cuddles about the 9. I'm wondering 2 things. Have you ever looked at having a route that skips the Mumford Terminal for people that are just going between Spryfield and downtown? And number 2, we ever studied dedicated bus lanes on Quinpool to help with that.
I guess so. The Route 9, we did talk about that fairly extensively, but 8 or 9 years ago, or even longer, when we were working on the Moving Forward Together plan, and then again in 2019 and 2018, looking at Mumford Terminal and is it in the right location, and then again working on BRT. And I think it's something that comes up a lot when we're doing transit planning, because it does seem that for the 9, Mumford is a bit out of the way, but also it's kind of in the middle between the Windsor Street Exchange and the roundabout, but it is a really important connection point. So whenever we look at it, we've always continued to put the 9 through there, because not everyone is going all the way downtown, right? It's that connection maybe to the Route 3 to get to Burnside, which is we also hear a lot about from folks in Spryfield. So I think the connection is a hard one to lose. I haven't been involved in any conversations about Quinpool specifically in recent years. Yeah, so I'm not aware of any active work related to Quinpool at the moment.
Okay, thanks. My other question was about the 111 preventable collisions. Were any of those with humans?
Good afternoon. Stuart McDonald, Acting Director for Employee Support and Development. Can I just have the question again? I think it was where any of the...
I saw 215 collisions in the quarter and 111 were preventable. I'm wondering if any of those preventable... anyways, maybe just in general. Did we hit any people with buses this quarter?
Okay, yeah, I see that the report doesn't have them broken down by collision type, and I can certainly look and see what, if you'd like a little more detail on the types of collisions, we can certainly
Okay, you can just say, Laura, read the report maybe, because I just showed up.
No,
it's all in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
If the detail that you're not looking for is in there as far as that particular type of collision,
Okay.
I don't have that in front of me right now, but I can get that for you.
Fair enough, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question around the number 21, Timberley, and I receive a lot of concerns from residents about its reliability. I also understand sometimes it's a pass-by, or I forget what the term you used is, and also linkages with the number 4. If you're trying to connect later in the day from Dalhousie to the number 4 leaving Dalhousie, linking it to the number 21. Do we look at those linkages? So just curious about this, and I know some of this may be coming in the core service plan in the update.
Yeah, definitely. The 21 actually made the list of one of the higher performing routes, I believe, on the ridership page. So it is very busy, and it does tend to get caught a bit in congestion through the Bears Lake portion. In terms of, and we did hear a lot about the 21 in our core service plan engagement, and we did kind of have a focus area on Bears Lake and asked a lot of questions about the 21 to people. So in terms of linkages at Lacewood Terminal, the 21 can connect. There would be some people we expect connecting to the route 2, 3, or 4, or maybe other routes, and we basically have to pick which connection or which anchor to put it with. So the 21 would be timed opposite the 28, so that they're not both leaving Lacewood Terminal to go to Bears Lake at the same time. So that would have been the way we anchored it, and we didn't intentionally look to make the transfer from the Route 4 work well because, you know, there would be people going to all of the routes. So I can go back and take a look at what that means for the 4 and how that lines up. And there may be ways to, you know, sometimes we can still keep it spaced out with the 28, but have a bit of a better connection. And we're always happy to look and do that. But that is specifically what we were trying to do with its schedule when we made changes a few years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I have a question I'd like to ask from the chair, if it's okay with the committee. Thank you. I just wonder if you could say a little bit about the service reliability analysis and how that will be used to improve on-time performance and when council might see that, mostly concerned about how it will fit in with our budget process and discussions for transit.
Sure. So we're still very much in the middle of it, I would say, and I don't have a target date to get it back to council yet. And I think what it's fair to say that, you know, each stone you lift up, you uncover more and more. And, you know, it is complex with many different factors. And we want to make sure we're doing a deep dive and really understanding all of the different factors and how they connect. So there is still a fair bit of work to do on that. And then I don't have a date for it yet. It absolutely would, or the goal is to be able to identify the factors that are impacting reliability and on-time performance, and really find some of those root causes and come up with action. So the intent is that it would improve our on-time performance. And, you know, even as we're working through this, if we're finding kind of low-hanging fruit, we would be trying to do those things right away. We're not waiting for it to be finalized, but I think it is a bit of a heavy lift.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and being here today. Moving on, there are no... Oh, sorry. Yeah. Do committee members have any notices of motion? No? That brings us to the end of our meeting then. The next date of our next meeting is January 22nd, 2026. And could I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Councillor Young. Thanks, everyone.